outsourcing, and that is offshore outsourcing, where we are going to understand the market developments, risks, and risk mitigating strategies. So this is, here we go. This is day 2 today. In terms of lecture, as we have already started with understanding what is offshore outsourcing, from there we will now kick off further to understand the market developments, risk and risk mitigating strategies. In terms of group discussion on case study, we have today taken a case study on changing requirements in offshore outsourcing engagements. As we have already seen yesterday, the basic concepts behind offshore outsourcing, it is the transfer of IT service delivery responsibility to a provider operating from a continent different from the recipient, is currently experiencing a growth with double-digit figures. So it's a quite attractive venture for the companies which are outsourcing and also the service providers. In comparison to ordinary outsourcing, however, it does require some extra governance. Yes, of course, because the businesses are scattered across different geographical locations, not necessarily only 2, but more than 2, because as we have seen that in multiple outsourcing, the client can have many different service providers. So, potentially it could be the geographically well spread across different countries, not necessarily the client, the companies where it is located at, and the offshore outsourcing location, it could well be beyond those 2 boundaries as well. That depends on how many service providers you have. Offshore outsourcing may be defined as the transfer of responsibility for delivering IT services to a provider who delivers these services from a country different. So this is just a simple definition. The difference with ordinary outsourcing is the geographical distance between provider and the client, right? Sometimes an intermediary kind of outsourcing is distinguished, near shore, which we have already discussed yesterday, which is then taken to be outsourcing to a provider operating from a low-wage country on the same continent as that of a recipient. And that's why we talked about the concept of the neighboring country where you want to outsource your work. The long-term business strategies of many West European and North American multinationals of today include offshore outsourcing as an essential component. Shell announced its collaboration with IBM Global Services, Wipro, and Accenture, for example, while Procter & Gamble and General Motors have their offshore substantial parts of their IT services. So what it is trying to say that mainly offshore outsourcing is quite lucrative when we talk about the developed countries. Let us say some countries from the Western Europe and North American countries, and they want to outsource their businesses to the developing countries in Asia, Philippines, and even in some other developed continent, there are countries where the outsourcing is quite imperative. Like in European continent, also there are countries like Hungary, Romania, where outsourcing is very frequently done. Yes, please. So when we talk about Western European country, do you know what developed countries probably would come under Western European countries? Like, which are very active in outsourcing their work to this part of the world. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Germany. Now, yeah, after Brexit, probably you cannot quite consider UK as a part of European Union, isn't it? But yes, that is still the outsourcing is quite much, frequent and quite imperative from the UK, and you have said like in France, Germany, Poland, and also Ireland. All these countries are actually outsourcing their businesses into the Asian and some Eastern European countries as well. When we talk about North American countries, what countries you think they are very active in terms of outsourcing to this part of the world? Mexico, Canada, US. Yeah, so these countries are very, very active in terms of outsourcing their work to this part of the world, and some of the countries in Eastern European region as well. As we have already discussed, that the key reason of such outsourcing is cost saving, of course, and also the globalization. Most services that are outsourced are delivered from India. China also offers reasonably qualified resources and in almost inexhaustible quantities because of the resources that they have, right? They have, paramount resources to support all kinds of offshore outsourcing services from the developed countries, European countries, North American countries, and some Eastern European countries as well. But they have their own limitations. We will come back to that later. East European countries like Russia, Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic are suitable candidates for offshore outsourcing as well as Ireland. Okay, so these are the countries which are also equally eligible candidates for the offshore outsourcing. Providing outsourced IT services makes a major contribution to these countries' economies and results in significant cost savings. That's what the key aspect of the outsourcing phenomenon is. Nowadays, many companies have relationships with suppliers and clients located at much greater distances than before, and this process is called globalization. So why we talk about globalization in IT outsourcing or in general outsourcing business is that, particularly when we talk about offshore outsourcing, is only because the outsourcing is going to be spread across the country region, beyond the country region, or most of the time beyond the continent. So globalization is very much into existence when we talk about offshore outsourcing. The step towards collaboration with IT providers operating from low-wage countries has thus become easy, especially since the ongoing technological developments render distances less and less of a problem. So why these businesses are prospering? Also because there is no boundary, no limitations, no restrictions in terms of the organizations, companies from the developed world, outsourcing their work to the developing world, and then get the seamless, services from the service providers, no matter where they are located, at 24/7, and that's why they prefer outsourcing such work. But in some cases, these services are not provided all the time. At first, only service providers located in low-wage countries offered offshore outsourcing. These were companies like Cognizant, Infosys, TCS, and Wipro. These are the names, Indian multinationals, which are very popular in terms of taking outsourcing work from across the world, particularly from the North American and Western European countries, right? And that's why you see that Infosys, TCS, Cognizant, Wipro, whatever Indian multinational companies are, in addition to their, the core business of developing software, they also have all sorts of call centers and customer support, customer care unit, which provide constant support to the customers from developed world, right? So these are the popular destinations as far as India is concerned, but there are many other service providers which are available. Now, providers headquartered in Western countries such as Accenture, CSC, HP, Logica, and IBM also have set up these subsidiaries in low-wage countries. Now, this is very interesting. Firstly, when we talk about subsidiaries, can you tell me what is subsidiary and probably how you can differentiate it with the other similar terminology, such as branch office? You might have heard of the concept of branch office and subsidiary. So, these companies, which are also very well known in terms of offshoring their business to the developing countries, they have also opened their subsidiaries. So, for example, IBM has opened its subsidiary in India, right? So does Accenture. So does many other companies. Google, Microsoft, all have their subsidiary offices. And some of them have also opened their branch offices in India. So how they are different to each other?
Sir, in subsidiary, the company operates
Where they?
As an individual unit, which is an individual business working for some particular company. And the branch office, a particular set of employees are under the parent company itself.
Yeah. Subsidiary, what did you say about subsidiary? Can you please clarify?
It's a different unit. It's an independent unit.
Yes.
Which acts under the parent company.
Which acts under the parent company, and branch office, you said that it is a part of the parent company. So then what is the difference then? The company works for the parent company and it's a part of the same company.
Managerial control is with the in branch office, the managerial control is with the parent company itself, but in subsidiary the unit has their own managerial control.
Yes, absolutely. So in other words, if I say this, the way you have said, I'm just saying, and just tell me if I'm correct. Subsidiary is a company where the control is not entirely in the hand of the parent company. If you have a stake or share of more than 50%, then you can consider that particular independent business as a subsidiary, because although it is controlled and maintained by someone else, you have the majority of a stake in the company. So you can still get your work done from there. Whereas branch office is the exactly same office, but it is an extended form of the parent company located somewhere in the developing world. And they, rather than offshoring, why they do open the branch office? Because they have all the control, and the main purpose of offshore outsourcing is still fulfilled, because in the branch offices, like if IBM has a branch office in India, then I can hire staff from Indian workforce, and I can still pay them the equivalent wages, salary as what Indian IT multinational software engineers or other people at different levels get. They can't expect salary as what they get in US or in Europe. So they still manage to save considerably by opening the branch office, but the mission and vision of that branch office is exactly same as the parent company, which is being operated from the developed country or the developed world, right? So these offer them a competitive advantage, because while they already know their clients' world and therefore their needs, the new subsidiaries enable them to offer their services much more inexpensively than before, right? Because they have their offices open in the developing country. Another differentiating development is the increase in the number of companies setting up shared service centers in low-wage countries. That we have already seen, right? Shared services centers, shared IT service centers And the examples of such companies are General Electric, General Motors, World Bank, have done so in India, where they deliver to all their branches in the world. This increases the volume of services that are offshored significantly. So, there are different ways in which the company try and expand themselves and try and outreach to the different part of the world. And this is not entirely because the companies want to go for cost savings, but also for the convenience of delivering services to the local customers. If I have opened a branch office in India, for example, let us take HSBC Bank. Yeah, it has about 200 branch offices spread across 70 countries in the world. So if I have to deliver services to a country, rather than getting any service that you expect as a customer, trying and remotely connecting yourself to the other part of the world, if the branch service is there and if you get the customer support, customer care service from that country itself, it is much easier for you to communicate and to get your queries clarified, rather than calling like the Western people calling to the Chinese call center, the call center located in Philippines or India, and to certain extent not able to satisfy such companies, such BPOs, call centers, not able to satisfy their needs. So that is also one reason why the shared services centers, branch offices, subsidiaries are opened at the different location in the world, apart from the place where the company was originally established, particularly for the companies which originated in the Western world. To start to insourcing where subsidiary placement in India. There is always another side of a coin. The need for innovation to the existing outsourcing model paved way for insourcing. So we are talking about outsourcing, offshore outsourcing. But if we see the other side of the coin, it is also about innovation. Right? And for innovation to the existing outsourcing model, sometimes companies want to insource. And why do you want to insource? Firstly, before we understand what do we mean by insourcing, firstly we try to understand what do we mean by insourcing, and then why the companies sometimes want to insource. So insource means What do you think about insourcing? Outsourcing we have seen, right? Nearshoring, offshore outsourcing, and all that. But probably we haven't quite used the word insourcing. What do you think? It could be, from one of your subsidiaries or one of your branch offices, right? Or probably shared services center. Or sometimes happens so that if you have outsourced, right, in hunt of, getting the cutting edge, innovative technological development, and then after some time, you got to know that the service level agreements are not able to be met by the outsourcing service provider company, and then you decide, rather than to take that business and get it outsourced or offshored, why not to bring it back and invest more into it, try and invest more into the workforce, skilled resources, and try and develop that part within your company. So that is insourcing. So subsidiary placement or branch offices or shared services center they could also be considered as part of insourcing. One reason for insourcing to occur is if a company had previously outsourced. So that's what it is saying. IBM recorded a tremendous growth in its Indian office from 9,000. So there were 9,000 employees in IBM in 2003, which, went up to 74,000 in 2007. So the growth was tremendous. And why IBM, why any such companies would like to have their subsidiaries or the branch offices established in the developing country? Because they want to see how they are likely going to improve their business by, kind of insourcing or keeping the business under its umbrella rather than letting it go to the service providers. So IBM holds pride in being one among the first technology giants to insource in India by starting a huge technology base around 1992. IBM recorded a tremendous growth in its Indian office between 2003 and 2007, which holds a headcount growth by almost 800%. This marks a great start to utilization of talented engineers in Indian market. So, this is not only, when we talk about offshoring and when the companies, particularly the big companies, offshore their businesses for some time and then they, try and realize by researching and comparing its business before they offshored and after it, then they try and understand how probably this similar, profit making could be achieved with more efficiency, better innovation, and by putting in, effective policies, procedures, and processes rather than offshoring. Why not to? Because, such companies have huge amount of money to invest into such businesses, opening subsidiaries, opening their branch offices, shared services centers, rather than offshore outsourcing. Why not to go ahead and expand their business rather than outsourcing? Although it's not quite imperative and it's not quite obviously seen in case of the medium and small scale organizations, because they may not probably be able to invest that much of money, because that could probably go beyond the investment that they could have afforded in terms of giving the certain business processes outsourcing to some offshore service providers rather than investing a lot in creating the infrastructure, then employing such employees in that country, and then start reaping the benefit of inshoring in the other way. So for them, offshoring is the only choice. But the giants like what we have seen, IBM, Microsoft, Google, all these companies, Accenture, they can go beyond that level and try and establish their new infrastructure, try and create their new unit in any other countries where they think they can get more profit out of employing the local people and getting the same quality of work done from there. Offshore outsourcing also raises new organizational and societal issues. Quite a number of jobs for highly qualified staff disappear because of it. So from the originating company, which are there in the developed country, if they start offshoring most of their business processes and functions and tasks, then what the employees are going to do, and that results in the layoffs of the employees, because those employees cannot so easily could be put onto the other work with the same efficiency. So there is no other way for the company than to lay off such employees. The social unrest this development causes expresses itself in, for example, Buy American movement in the United States, where attention is drawn to American IT professionals who have lost their jobs, and that is what one of the election agendas of Donald Trump was to retain the work, don't let the work go out of United States, and also try and bring those works back into United States which have gone in the past, and try and give more employment to the local people, right? So that's the agenda there. Such lobbying has understandably made many companies hesitant about offshore outsourcing. They do not want the negative publicity that the layoffs would bring. So no company would want to have any negative publicity by laying off the employees, simply saying that I cannot retain you only because there is no work left for you in the organization. The work has already been offshored. This is not a positive publicity. And the big companies do not want, and that's why in the big companies like Google, Microsoft, IBM, Accenture, even in the cases of the outsourcing, either the skilled professionals are trained in the other areas, or they are asked to sit idle for some time, and company still pay them the amount of money which they get in salary. So this is what the offshore outsourcing works in its different forms. But when we talk about offshore outsourcing, there are various risks associated with it as well. So as before I started, I said that I will take 3 different aspects of offshore outsourcing today. The first one is development. The second one is risk associated with offshore outsourcing. And the third one is the risk mitigating strategies. So this is the second part. The development of offshore outsourcing, you have seen by the different companies, how they react, how they intend to do, what substitutes they try and build in order to save more money, more cost effective, be more innovative, and still remain as the leader in that IT service management for which they are known for. But when we talk about developments and all the different possibilities of offshore outsourcing, there are various risks involved with it as well. And these are some of the risks categories which we need to know while involving as a company into offshore outsourcing business. First is cultural risk. Yesterday we also talked about cultural risk, right? When we are going for offshore outsourcing. And what cultural risks, probable cultural risks are involved in it? Yeah, language is another one. You see yes, because of the cultural issues, language could also be a barrier, but it is not only about understanding or communicating or in terms of language barriers, but also because of the difference of culture. People do not tend to understand the things in the same way as you do, right? For example, yesterday I told you yes, how it is understood by the Western people in the Western world, and particularly in Asian context. Also, your gesture, your posture also makes the difference when it comes to cultural difference. The way you behave, your activities, your social behavior, all these fall under this category, right? For example, from my own experience, what I can tell you that nodding your head when you say yes, what usually we do here. When we say yes, right? When we say no, we say no, right? But when any British English person will ask you, and it is just when you have to respond without speaking, and if you say no, that means they consider this as yes. Yeah. So if they say, are you coming along, and you say no, they think that you are coming along, right? So this is not only about the verbal communication, your gesture and posture also directs tell different meanings to the people from the different backgrounds, right? So the cultural difference is the main thing, and for that we also very briefly talked about how we can overcome those cultural differences. And we came to the conclusion that if we give training to the people, that how to behave, how to talk with the people of different culture in order to try and make this balance in terms of thinking, understanding each other, that's the way we can overcome it. But when it is offshore, when it comes to offshore outsourcing, cultural barrier is one of the difficult issues that often arise, and that can be resolved only when you try and bring the people from the recipient to the service provider, and service provider to the recipient, more frequently bringing them quite closely to each other, right? So in that way you can minimize, although it's very difficult to try and completely take this barrier out of context in offshore outsourcing. So differences in culture inhibit the offshore outsourcing relationship, including national and corporate culture differences. So that's the cultural difference. Language and communication. Language and communication is again a barrier. But when you look at the literature, academic literature, business literature, you will get to know that the language and communication barrier is minimal when it comes to India, and that's why probably India is the most sought for hub for offshore outsourcing, because of our communication and language background is quite deeply rooted into English language, and most of us try and understand English right from the beginning of our education system. So when it comes to India, there is hardly any problems, and majority of the companies from the Western world who have involved into offshore outsourcing in India, the research indicates that they have not considered language and communication as one of the barriers. But here in general, when we talk about offshore outsourcing, it is not only confined to Indian context. The problem of communication and language barrier is most often considered in China. And that's why when we talk about offshore outsourcing, India is growing increasingly in terms of knowledge process outsourcing as a knowledge process outsourcing hub, but at the same time China is considered as the offshore outsourcing hub for product related stuff, and that's why you see that because the labor is equally cheaper, even much cheaper than India, and that's why the production related work is largely done in China, because in that sort of offshoring where the people only in top management are responsible to communicate effectively to the people back in Western countries, not laborers at the very grassroots level are involved in communication. They are very well equipped with the skills of manufacturing the product, but unfortunately they can't speak. So although there are many call centers are there, but not as many as India, because not many people can effectively and efficiently communicate and convince and satisfy the customers' expectations and needs. And that's why you cannot beat China in terms of product outsourcing, because the labor is very cheap. They can manufacture world-class products. Whatever company you see, all the products are made in China. Even no matter wherever you go to America, you go to England, you go to any European country, most of the products you put your hand in and try and see that I want to take my take any product from the particular company from where you want to purchase it. It is very highly unlikely that you are going to get the product manufactured from that country, particularly in Britain and America, or any other developed country. Any product you go to the shopping centers, you go and pick it, 95% out of 100 it will be made in China. Or if it is not, it will definitely be made in Bangladesh, Taiwan, Myanmar, and all that. Because people are, the labor cost is much more cheaper, they are not able to communicate effectively. So you always try to promote things where you are good at. So that's what they are doing. Although they are not lagging too much behind from India, also because of their population, right? They have huge population. And now this generation in China, in terms of proficiency in English, they are much more better than the previous generation. So, they are coming up very fast in terms of catching up with India or any other leading countries which are currently known as the offshore outsourcing leaders. So, although this generation is coming up very quick, but still they lack such proficiency and skills. Chinese people, by the way, they are not good in English, even this generation, what we are witnessing in our university, but they are very excellent in their mathematical skills. I don't know. And when it comes to writing something in English, if you ask them, they won't be able to tell what it is. They won't be able to effectively communicate to you. But when it comes to write an exam, you simply can't beat them. They mug things up like anything, and they go and just vomit an exam exactly the same, without any difference in comma, semicolon, full stop. Yeah, you will sometimes think and try and match your notes with the examination script that they have written, whether they have copied, cheated. But no, they have. The system is such that it can't simply allow anyone to cheat, but it is exactly the photocopy of what you have put in your notebook, or the note they have given. You have given them as a note. So they have their own brilliance at certain fields, but of course when it comes to communication, they are not quite proficient in it. Different time zones. Do you think time zone is a barrier in terms of offshore outsourcing? Yeah, it's an obvious one. Particularly when the companies from North America outsourcing somewhere in India, it's a big problem because the time difference is 10 hours, 10, 11 hours. So by the time we are here going to office, they are going to their bed. So how to manage it? It's the difference in time zone. It's not quite a problem in England and the European countries because the difference is only 4 to 5 hours. Yeah, so they can still manage without working 24/7. But when it is North American countries, it's it can be done. You can cope up as an offshore outsourcing company, service provider, to take the challenge, take the work that you are getting from North American companies, but probably that won't be as cheaper as the company from the North America would have expected you to agree on through SLA, right? Because of you have to manage 2 different time zones, and then you have to employ people who work day shift and night shift, and so the overall expenses are going to go high. Managing scope changes in the scope. We have seen that if the changes in the scope change, then means how you are going to deliver. How you are going to deliver the outcome that you have signed in with the outsourcing company. And if that is very fluctuating, changing quite rapidly, this is going to be a problem for the service provider. So change in the scope of the offshore outsourcing contract impact the service delivery process. Human capital. Do you think human capital could be a risk? What is human capital, before getting into details of whether it could be a risk? What do you understand when it comes to human capital? Skills, you mean? Yeah. So it is you can say the intangible asset, right? That's the workforce, the people, the employees possess, right? And that you can develop by providing them adequate training. Firstly, when they join, you have to make sure that you have selected right people for the right job. And to improve further on from there, you need to provide them right training, right? Support, so that they can, the further skills and training needed in order to work the specific task can be inculcated into them. And so, human capital is pretty much an important thing, because it is not only vital for the individual to who the training is given, the support is provided, but at the same time it is also very important for the company which has given him an employment. It is pretty much important and relevant for the entire community. So this is a kind of intangible asset. The absence of employees with the right skill set and competencies limit the quality of service delivery process. So you need to make sure that your employees are well equipped, well skilled. If it is not, then so basically the risk is not the human capital but the lack of human capital, isn't it? If you are not equipping your employee with the right skills, right training, and the adequate knowledge needed to support your work, probably that is not what you are going to get from them. What you have expected, you are not going to get from them. So human capital, it's basically the lack of human capital is a risk. Rotating onshore resources. Due to staff rotation, instability in the team that is responsible for service delivery process constraints the service delivery process. So, you shouldn't do and rotate the employees more frequently, because then they have to adjust to the different work environment, different nature of work, and that will not bring the kind of performance that you expect from them. Infrastructure. Unstable infrastructure to support the service delivery process hinders the service delivery process. So it is not about infrastructure, but the lack of infrastructure could be a risk. Security and privacy, we have seen that it is not only a risk in terms of outsourcing, but offshore outsourcing or any kind of outsourcing, because the service providers, you have to find a service provider, and that's what is said, that you have to find the right partner, right, who can look after your data in a more secure way than what you the more secure way as they are expected to keep your data and all the information, sensitive information that you have outsourced, and also making sure that the privacy of customer is not violated who are linked with you. Knowledge transfer. Knowledge transfer processes between service provider and service recipient are essential to service delivery. This is impacted by cultural risks, language, and communication risks. So this is again a risk, because this is a risk particularly more significant for the recipient, because you need, if you want the specific complex tasks to be done by the service provider, and you think that this probably can't be understood in the same way as you have mentioned in the service level agreement, then you need to transfer your skilled workforce for a few months at the service provider's location in order for them to mingle up rightly up to the expectation of the recipient company there and try and also support them, make themselves aware of what is the expectation of the company, and help them for a few months in order to understand the everyday functioning and working and expectations of the company from the work that has been outsourced. Understanding of business processes. Understanding of business processes of the service recipient is again a risk. If you have a limited understanding, it's a risk. If you have understood by the proper knowledge transfer, by having the right people in place to look after the tasks, the processes that you have taken to provide services to the service recipient, then it's okay. But if there is not adequate understanding, there is a limited understanding, that could still be a risk. Geopolitical risk. Have you heard of geopolitical risk, which is involved? What do you think? What it is?
Different kind of government in different geographical locations.
Yeah.
So that creates a risk because in your country there is a different kind of politics that is involved.
Hmm.
In foreign countries there is different politics.
In addition to what you have said, there is also a risk about, okay, there are different governments, so you have a risk because the work, the rules, the regulations, the legislations and all are different when you cross your boundary. But it is not only limited to it. The geopolitical risk is also about understanding the instability of the government in the other country, and also instability of not only the government, but the entire country could be unstable because of some reason, because of war, because of flood, because of any natural disaster, earthquake and all. So, although you don't know, but some of these you can mitigate, you can understand, you can predict, sense in prior, and then try and decide whether you want to go to that country or not, right? For example, if we take, let's say, Brexit. I think you must have heard of Brexit, and that's probably one of the hotcakes, as in terms of case studies for management students nowadays. So because of Brexit, what happens? European countries are not quite interested in investing their business into Great Britain because everything is now changing. Britain has their own independent entity, and it has come out of the European Union. So it is going to have its own rules and regulation, and those regulations are not quite, in accordance with how the rest of the European Union was operating with, British companies before, because there were less restrictions because Britain was still the part of European Union. But now, even in education system in Britain, previously the European countries, the students of European countries were treated as local students, but now no more. Means if you are not a local student, means as a local students, if let's say the fee for the local student, for foreign students, if I'm going from India to study, let's say in Oxford University, the fee is about £35,000 a year. Yeah, so that's what you have to pay. But the local student there, British student, only have to pay 1/5 of the overall fee, right? So it is about £7,000. Now, because before Brexit, even the students from Netherlands, from France, Germany, and all, they were considered as European Union students, and they all had to pay only 1/5 of the entire fee, but they now have to pay 35,000. So people are not showing that much of interest to go and study in Britain. Rather, they would have their choice somewhere in America. Even if they have to pay a little more, they think that America is a better destination for them. So likewise, if we take example, let's say in terms of oil, right? Supply of oil by Iran and Saudi Arabia, they don't like each other at all, and the spike because of the oil war is constantly going on between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and even Saudi has some more enemies that it has created, Qatar and Bahrain and many other countries, where they have even stop people from the other Gulf countries to come in their country for Hajj. Yeah? They are not allowing people of Qatar or any other nearby countries, Bahrain, and Jordan, and many, Dubai, UAE, all other countries. They have simply asked them not to come to my country. And because of that, not only their economy is getting badly impacted, but also those people are very religious. Even the people from Qatar who were working in Saudi Arabia, Qatar has called them back to their country. Saudi Arabia has driven them out of the country. So all those people, although there were not many, because Qatar is such a rich country, generally people don't tend to go to any other country for the work purposes. But even a handful of people, they were compelled to go out of Saudi Arabia. So that has impact. So in that way, it is going to impact definitely on any such offshore outsourcing, not necessarily in IT services management, but there are many other sectors where outsourcing is taking place. And if there is such instability, such turbulence is there, this is going to badly impact. So that is the risk, isn't it? So this one is geopolitical risk, size of offshore outsourced IT services. So size is also a risk because, if the service provider thinks that you have not given substantial amount of work to them, probably they are not going to give you that much of importance. If they think that they are getting adequate amount of profit from you, probably they will be more loyal to you. They would give you more attention, better services. If it is not, that is again a risk, whether you are going to get the standard of services that you have expected. And that's why, because of all these issues, risks, most of the projects which are outsourced, if you go and see the literature, academic literature, you'll get to know that 90%, 85 to 90% such offshore outsource work are going to get badly affected at one point or the other. And most of them results into failure at the end. Because there is a service level agreement breaches, knowingly or unknowingly service providers are not able to stand to the expectations of the companies. There are many failures, lack of skills, knowledge, lack of workforce, a skilled workforce, which we have called this here as human capital. So all these are the things where you can consider these as risks. Length of the contract. Length of contract can also determine your seriousness toward offshoring your work. The length of the contract determines the opportunity for service provider as well to cover costs. Long-term contracts result in a lock-in of the service recipient, and short-term contracts will not support the implementation of proper service delivery process. So that could also vary, fluctuate the kind of treatment that you receive from the service provider from offshore. Trust and relationship, yes, it is a strength as well, and it could also be considered as a risk. So lack of natural trust between the offshore vendor and client could be a risk for the offshore outsourcing. So these are different types of risks that we can think in terms of offshore outsourcing. Of course, there are many other risks, on one-to-one, if individual basis we see, but these are some of the common risks which are seen across a number of outsourcing relationships between clients and service providers across the world. Now, when we think about the IT services, there are many kinds of such IT services, but for the purpose of risk assessment with respect to offshore outsourcing, there are two prominent, broadly considered IT services, and they are software development and infrastructure management. Okay? So I think you all know about software development, right? Software development is application development, right? Managing software, anything that you do for software, particularly when we consider the offshore outsourcing phenomenon in India. Do you know what are the most prominent software development aspects are common and considered in India? What specific technology development or services related aspects are taken care of in India? Or what different application development or software development expertise are available, about which the Western companies are very much trustful to offshore their work to India? There are two. Yeah? Can you guess what two different, IT services or IT application development or software development tasks which are highly outsourced in India? Java development related work, because we have a huge amount of Indian skills which are very trained, and if you go and see the statistics of people who are certified, how the research from the companies are well informed about the people and confident about the people in India and what they are capable of doing by understanding from the research of the people who are certified, so Java certification. And the second, there are again different levels of certification in Java, starting from SCJP, all different labels, but they are very highly skilled. And that's what we strive for. When we go and try and understand certain language technology, then we try and achieve some accolade out of it. And this we can achieve through some certification. And that's what we are known for. So Java is a very well understood and highly skilled people are found related to the development of the software development work, in particularly in Java. And the second most highly efficient workforce that we have in India is for web development. Yeah. So any site of website related work, any services that you want, it is the highly sought of destination, India. So these two technological developments that we have done in the past few years in a way that Western countries are very much bound to understand our skills, our capabilities, and they accept it, and that's why they outsource the work to India. Software development, also called as application development, means that new applications are custom made in order to enhance functionality. So that's what they expect. The companies expect to enhance the functionality of the software software application that they have, or they can also go for develop such software right from the scratch. It may also take some form of modifying, enhancing, customized, or packaged application. The integration, detailed design, and implementation of those applications and the management needed to link them to each other, and the recipient's current and planned infrastructure are included in the definition. So the services provided to support the implementation and rollout are, that's what they expect from the service provider. So anything related to whatever you can enhance to the existing applications, or if your capability in terms of designing and developing a new application altogether based on the client's requirement, and that's what it comes under software development. But you must be wondering what infrastructure management is and why it is needed, why it is one of the aspects for the offshore outsourcing. What is that infrastructure management is, and how it supports the offshore outsourcing. So infrastructure management consists of operational services, application management services, and help desk management services. Yeah. It is basically this includes the operation of the product or the services that is related to the operation of the products or services that you build through your expertise and skills. And it includes definitely, as we say, in operational services, management, application management, and help desk management services, but it broadly includes the various aspects of the organization in terms of the policies, processes, procedures, human resource management, the various operations which are being taken place, and executing them more efficiently in order to support the different aspects of operational services, application management services, and help desk management services. It includes preventive and remedial services for the physical reparation of optimization of hardware, technical troubleshooting, and fee and warranty-based assistance in setting up and upgrading hardware. So it could well be for hardware as well as for software. So if you provide any sort of support services for the repairment or the physical reparation or optimization of the hardware, they can be considered as infrastructure management related services linked to hardware. So for example, you can provide, you might have heard of people from the offshore service provider providing support for the repairment or the advancement of the hardware services. So if anything has gone wrong in your computer, and if calling the BPO, they will tell you a step-by-step process how to go and correct that, right? So it could be for computer, it could be for data storage devices, tape products, network products, terminal printers and copiers. So all these support that is needed for a company which are companies which are involved in the manufacturing processes of the product, the supports, the customer support is available through the offshore outsourcing, and that will become as infrastructure management services. Online or telephonic troubleshooting, installation assistance, and basic usability assistance concerning operating systems for desktop computers, networks and servers, application software for personal productivity, word processing, making presentation, databases, systems and network management software and tools, and utilities such as performance monitoring and virus detection. These all can be done through the offshore outsourcing. Right? So it is related to hardware and software. You get all sorts of support from the service provider, and they could well be considered as infrastructure management services, right? Because they are one or the other type of operational services, application management services, or help desk management services, right? So in other words, sometimes we also call infrastructure management as systems management, network management, and services management. So it is the integration of all these together. So whether you have a problem, some problem related to systems or the hardware, it is something related to your operating systems or any network related issues, any software related issues, all these could be managed by the service provider from the offshore distant place. Infrastructure management is characterized by long-term contracts, a limited interaction with one's end users, and process-driven and stable requirements. So here is one example of a case where a service delivery manager of a large Europe-based discrete manufacturing company explains why the relationships with their clients have long contract periods. We run ERP applications for our customers. The cost of setting up and implementing these services are substantial. Therefore, we have contracted for 36 months with an annual renewal option. So this is a part of infrastructure management, and generally, unlike the application development or software development, the contract for the infrastructure management related services are long term, and generally the communication is not as frequent as what you have in the software development. Let's say, when we talk about software development and people working here as a service provider in India, working for, let's say, when I was working in a software industry for about 3 years, I myself was working for a vendor, right? Siemens healthcare system in America. So, Siemens healthcare system had a number of customers linked to the application which was developed by them. Again, it would have been developed through offshore outsourcing for sure. But what we were doing, we were providing services to the customers of Siemens, right? So, Siemens customers logged into the system and they put in what they want from the system, if they need any appointment with the doctor, and what time, and all these different aspects and scenarios were put into the system. But not all the time the system used to respond in a smooth fashion. There would be some error some point in time where the response is not being generated back to the customer, what the customer is going to do. So there was one offshore outsourcing vendor located in Bangalore, for which I was working for about 3 years, and the people which were working in the group were responsible to fix the issues which are being detected in the system. And this group of people were working on Agile Methodology. You might have heard of, right? Agile Methodology is a process by which you instantly try to satisfy the customer's need as quickly as possible. So let's say customer has logged in and the customer is not going to get response, and the customer, let's say, is suffering from a disease for which the attention is needed from the clinics, the surgery, very urgently. What the customer will do? Because in America you cannot simply go, or in England you cannot simply go and step into the surgery and say that this can you please see me, I have this problem. You are simply not allowed to do that. You have to do everything. You have to get appointment through the system on time, everything, all automated. Now, if the customer has logged in, let's say in the morning, where in India it is night, or in the afternoon where it is midnight, in India, then what would the customer can sue the company, because can say that I'm suffering from a serious disease, cancer. I wanted this appointment, but the system didn't let me take the appointment. Now I will sue the company. I will ask company to pay me $1 million for that. Now this is because the system's fault. The company owes that amount of money to the customer, because that's what it is written, as a part of legislation. You cannot simply ditch the person because of the glitches, technical glitches in the system. So in order to rectify that problem, company here in Bangalore working 24/7 on the customer complaints and issues, right? So they generate, as soon as the customer complains, firstly, the customer is not going to straight away sue the company. It will go through the system. The customer will raise the concern, and that problem has to be now solved, because the error, the system is not able to generate the report about the appointment of the customer. The system has to be fixed, let's say, within an hour, so that it can generate the report and give proper appointment later to the customer, so that probably next day the customer can step into the doctor's door for the treatment. And the window of resolving this issue is 1 hour. That's what the Agile methodology is. And so the people are there, 24/7, monitored by highly skilled people who knows the entire nitty-gritties of the system. This is not that the company or the vendor, the service providers, for such critical issues, because if because of our fault as the service provider, if we are not able to resolve the problem, probably whatever the customer has sued that company for $1 million is going to come to that service provider because of the service level agreement. So, you have to make sure that the problem which was raised by the customer, triggered by the system, coming to the service provider, has to be fixed within an hour. Now, when you have the problem, and many a times we had such problem, for which the window of resolving that is only an hour or two, because beyond that, customer cannot wait and will take some action, which is going to be pretty much badly, negatively impacted to the company's not only reputation, but also in terms of paying back certain amount of money for which the customer has sued the company. So, that's what we're saying, that, in infrastructure management, the Agile methodology, things are that you have to resolve the issues within very limited time. And if, let's say, 4 or 5 people are just flocking together to try and understand the problem, not only just merely to understand it, but also to resolve it, and by any chance if the problem is not being understood, then comes the team leader, project manager, technical architect, all of them. You have to make sure that the problem is resolved, even temporarily. You will see the long-term solution later on, but this time the problem has to be resolved. So, such issues are also being dealt in by the service providers, and some very trustworthy service providers do stand out very correctly and very efficiently to the client's expectations, and they resolve all such issues. But unfortunately, this is not possible in all the cases, and because of that, the company, the service providers and companies sometimes have to face the adverse outcomes because of that as well. So, this is one such example. The other issues could be related to geopolitical risks, which I have already told you. Telecommunication infrastructure and security have to function at the highest possible level, because infrastructure management is a very time-critical affair requiring real-time actions. So, infrastructure should be very strong. Security processes should be in place so that it cannot be breached. Particularly in America, in England, security is such that you are not allowed, particularly in healthcare and even in educational system. If I have, let's say, a cancer, the doctor is going to tell only me, not even to any of my close relative. If it is communicated to anyone, even my brother, sister, wife, father, anyone, that is the breach of legislation. You cannot do. Simply, also in education system, if the student has done very badly and has failed all his modules, right? I'm not allowed as a teacher to tell his father that he has failed. So security is that much paramount. You cannot simply go and tell. If the student wants, then can sue you. You could be out of service because of that in England. So security, you can understand how security, privacy rules in the Western countries are. And then, for that, service providers and all working people should understand how it is getting operated, how it is being understood there, and then reveal the information. Because if there is a call center asking about it, that's why you ask many security questions to make sure that you are the person to which the information is revealed, right? Particularly from the people involved from the Western country. Here, we reveal information to anyone, but this is such a crime there. So, and all these issues, cultural clashes, time zone differences, language barriers, we have seen. So, risk profiles for software development and infrastructure management. Okay. So here we have few characteristics which we can see in context of software development and infrastructure management. Service types, as we said, that for software development, even the shorter length of service is okay. But for the infrastructure management, if you go for the a service which is short in nature, probably it is very unlikely that it will be signed firstly by service providers, because these are such services which require more time. So for infrastructure management, the minimal service time, that's for 3 years. For software development, you can renew it every year. So that's the service types. Characteristic service level measured by checking the project deliverables and their timing. How would you get to know that whatever service you expected as a client, you are going to get the same level of service? How are you going to measure? Like, you will measure it with the deliverables that you are getting from the service provider, and when you are getting, whether the services that you are getting is on time or delayed. That also is the measurement criterion. Measured continuously during the entire contract period, because it is very difficult, particularly in infrastructure management, to measure the services that with the particular outcome, because it is about, you have seen the software, the hardware, the operating system, network related issues. So this has to be constantly monitored, right? And from there you can get to know what kind of service, what level of service you have got as a client. Interaction between providers, end users, and their managers. Here, in case of software development, the communication, intra-communication level of communication is very frequent, very high. But in case of infrastructure management, it is very low. I have outsourced certain amount of work to you. I will keep on monitoring, but that doesn't mean that I will keep on interacting and communicating with the service providers more frequently as we do in software development. Requirement dynamics, high. Business requirements change constantly. That's how we also argued it in terms of the aspects against the IT outsourcing. That's one of the problems, because the client, and this is not, they fancy about changing the requirement quite frequently, but they are bound to do that, because they operate in the environment which is quite dynamic, and the requirement change quite frequently as per the customer's demands and needs. So you are bound to do that, but it's quite high in case of software development, but not quite as what we see in software development. Stability during the entire contract period, because the service provider knows what exactly they are going to do, they are expected to do, and so the requirements don't tend to change quite as frequent as software development. Components of total service provisioning costs, mainly labor related costs. Labor and investment cost is also there, because it is the investment in the infrastructure. When you offshore your work related to software development, you don't tend to invest more into the offshore service provider, because you choose the service provider based on the strength and for the compatibility of the work that you need, and if they are equally skilled in it or not. And you don't need to do that. But in infrastructure management, you do need to invest initially sometimes. Now, this is a very relevant figure where you can see all these risks are listed here in the left, and they are measured in terms of the risk profile in context of software development and infrastructure management. So the cultural risk, and here in the perforated line you can see that all these are infrastructure management related risk, and this one is the application or the software development related risk, the solid line. So when it comes to the risk related to culture, it is, and again it is divided into 3 different types, whether the risk is limited or moderate or very strong risk. So if we see, now we have seen the 2 different types of work functions, processes in which the recipient outsource related to software development or infrastructure management, and secondly, whether they are at limited, moderate, and a strong risk level. So when it comes to culture, the application development risk is higher, whereas infrastructure management risk is very limited. Why do you think so? Yeah, that is one major reason. So you communicate very frequently, and so the cultural barriers can come into place when you try to communicate very frequently to your recipients. Language and communication, same as culture, so it is strong. Different time zones, very strong for software development, and very less for limited for the infrastructure management. Human capital, moderate risk for infrastructure management, very strong. High risk for application development. Rotating onshore resources and infrastructure have limited risk for application development, whereas security and privacy, again, if you see a strong risk for the application of software development, whereas it has moderate risk for infrastructure management. Likewise, all these risks are divided into three categories. And if you see this figure, you will find that majority of these risk types fall either into the limited or the very strong risk zone. Very few of them are falling in the moderate risk label. So these are the different risk zones. To minimize the risks, now we have talked about the overall development of offshore outsourcing. We have talked about the risks for application development and infrastructure management. Now, given that now we have talked enough about risk, we should also try and understand what are the risk mitigating strategies. What strategies that the companies should adopt in order to try and minimize the level of risk as much as possible. So these are the 6 most important risk mitigating strategies. The first one is working on the basis of certified processes. We will talk more about the certified processes on day 4, but this is one thing that we need to know. Using a standardized tools, ensuring that once communication facilities are good in order, selecting reliable local partners, using a standardized service level agreements, and implementing good contract management. Now let us take these risk mitigating strategies one by one. The first one is saying working on the basis of certified processes. There are several kinds of worldwide certification systems that can be applied to offshore outsourcing processes. The most important of these is the capability maturity model, which we are going to discuss at length on day 4. They are called CMM. And the further extension of this model is called CMMI, Integrated Capability Maturity Model, which is the standard for application development, and ISO. And you know the quality certification ISO, which is given to the different companies for their standard processes. And very similar other kind of certifications are like BS 9977 and BS 15000 for infrastructure. So these are basically used for infrastructure management. So if you see that the processes are standard, you can at least have a kind of initial trust, right? That they're, because their processes are standard, they have been certified, they must be doing work up to the expected standard and level. They offer outsourcing companies the enhanced safety of controlled security, language, time zone, and cultural risks. Even geopolitical risks are diminished by certification because IT service delivery can more easily be transferred to another location if the provider is certified. So what we have seen in the geopolitical risk is because of instability or any turbulence or any natural disaster in the company, if the company, the service provider is not able to give you the the expected amount of service, then because this service provider is not only having located in one country, it has the partners spread across all different countries. So your work will then be transferred to the company which is then liable to provide you service on time, right? So in that way, geopolitical risk can be handled. So when you are selecting the service providers, you have to take care of all these aspects so that even there is any risk involved in it, it could be, it has the possibility of getting mitigated because of the alternative course of actions which are available, which could possibly be taken to get our work done on time. At the moment, however, few providers actually work with certified processes, although their number is growing, right? So that's why there are only few standard service providers which recipients can trust and can get their services from. Using standardized tools. Most service providers have adopted the service delivery tools prescribed by IT Structure Library. Have you heard of ITIL? Yeah, so this is easier to transfer IT service delivery to professionals in low-wage countries. Standardized tools lessen the importance of time and culture and language barriers. So if you are using these standardized tools, the possibility of the risk associated with culture, time zone, and language barriers could be minimized, could be mitigated to a certain extent. Also being standardized, these tools can help providers to produce consolidated reports by making it less expensive to do so. For software development, the most important tools are those for project management since they help monitor the project progress. Do you know any such tool which are used for monitoring the project progress in software project management, software development and application? Microsoft Project. Yeah. And the model given by Gantt chart is also there, which can constantly monitor the progress of the people involved in development of a project. Ensuring communication facilities are good in order. Currently, there is a worldwide surplus in telecommunication facilities. Service providers can easily lease lines for their service delivery. That means they do not need dedicated lines for every client because dedicated lines are very, very expensive and that cannot be given to each and every client. So the lease line is a solution by which the risk possibly can be mitigated to a certain level. Ensuring communication facilities are good in order. Even if there are lines have a limited bandwidth per line, combining them enables providers to serve many clients inexpensively. On the other hand, due to overcapacity, dedicated communication lines are used to reduce security risks to the service provisioning. Dedicated communication lines are always good in terms of minimizing the security related issues, but unfortunately it's not possible to provide dedicated lines to all the clients. So only specific clients which are pretty much sensitive in terms of releasing their data, and in the same way in response if the companies are transmitting the data back to the client, and if pretty much required, the dedicated lines are used for service provisioning. For software development, communication facilities are less critical importance in terms of security and privacy, but they are still done with the lease line in most of the cases. But this may change if the providers start the remote testing of applications. Then reliable communication facilities are essential since this requires the real-time actions. So it is saying that in software development, the dedicated lines are not pretty much as important as we see it in some of the sensitive service provisioning instances. But in some cases where you are a service provider and being there in India, if you have to test the software software that you have developed at the client's machine. How would you do that? You need probably the dedicated line where you can more frequently go and test the software, the different versions of the software. So for remote testing, you need to have the communication being established not only very frequently but also very securely. And then you can probably establish the dedicated lines in such cases. Selecting reliable local partners, that is always important, whether it is outsourcing or offshore outsourcing anywhere. If you don't have the reliable partners, it's more unlikely that you are going to get the services on time, you are going to get the quality services, the services which you have agreed on through SLA. So, it's very important to have the long-term partners or the partners you have trusted, and then go ahead and sign the agreement for either for the software development or for the infrastructure management. Reliable partners is very important. The importance of having reliable partners is greater for software development than for infrastructure because it is directly linked to your performance. If the software that you have outsourced, offshored, and if it is not functioning as what you expected, then it's going to hurt you. And for that, it's very vital to find those reliable local partners. Yeah, local partners means when you have when your company is having all these subsidiaries and the branch offices and the service centers, then you find anyone in the local to provide you service. The service provider is local to your branch office, right? Local to your service centers, local to your subsidiaries. So that's why big companies have their one service partner, service centers or subsidiaries or branch offices are there so that they can directly communicate rather than, because communicating directly back and forth so frequently, particularly in the software development context, is quite expensive from the remote to the local area. So it's better if the service providers communicate locally to the branch office, subsidiary, or the service shared service centers locally, and then they communicate whatever is to be communicated and effectively, essentially to the so rather than communicating back and forth to the remote company client, it is always better to have the communication going on more frequently with your local partner. It is inexpensive, more effective, efficient way of communicating, and whatever needed, that will eventually communicated back to the main client, the parent company, I mean. The offshore outsourcing is no different to ordinary outsourcing. Infrastructure management workloads are little less dynamic. In this field, local partners are needed because some 1% of tasks must always be carried by people who are physically present at the client's end. Yeah, so there are certain examples and why you should go and find some local partners rather than communicating frequently, particularly in software development, to the offshore team. It's very important to find the reliable, trustworthy local partners. Using a standardized service level agreements, that's what you need for any outsourcing contract to be successful. If the service level agreement is vague, it is not written and not well understood by both parties, then it is of no use. So whether you follow it or not, whether you stand by what is written in the service level agreement is the further matter of further discussion and arguments. But more important than following it, it is very important to understand the service level agreements are written so clearly that it is understood both by client and the service provider. It shouldn't be vague. To accept the service level doesn't really apply to software development. It is project work, the deliverables of which must always be defined uniquely and unambiguously. The Information Services Procurement Library, however, has developed more or less a standard delivery plan to help the recipient, and they provide again clarity on what should be delivered and when. So this is the standard library where all the procedures, processes are very clearly written. And if you are going for offshore outsourcing, no matter which IT service providers you go for and who is the client, if they follow more or less the standard processes which are outlined here in Information Service Procurement Library, that will help the companies to clearly understand the agreements. And implementing good contract management is of crucial importance to both infrastructure management and software development. Doing so requires setting up contract management in both the recipient's country, low-wage country to which the service delivery has been offshored. So good contract management and implementing the good contract management is also very paramount as far as mitigating risk is concerned. Implementing under this one, of course, this raises the cost, but must be considered as necessary coordination cost because they diminish the culture, language, and time zone risks involved. In the case of software development, contract management is often called program management, but a mirrored setup remains equally important. Yeah, so these are some of the risk mitigating strategies that you should keep in mind while you are going for software offshore outsourcing or infrastructure management outsourcing. And so as a whole, we covered three things today. First of all, we understood and again try to reiterate things that we knew about offshore outsourcing, the development aspects of offshore outsourcing, the risks involved in offshore outsourcing, and what potential possible risk mitigating strategies that should be taken into account while you try and minimize the risks related to offshore outsourcing. So that is what we are expected to cover in this first 2 hours. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. If not, we will take a break of 10-15 minutes and we'll come back and do one more interesting case study. Yeah.
Can you explain further what is contract management?
Contract management is basically whenever you offshore outsourcing, it is about contracting, isn't it? So, and what is management? Management is nothing but how are you going to design, deliver, plan, control, monitor all these aspects. That is management. So contract related aspects, how they are going to be clearly, explicitly delivered, that comes under contract management. That's what you want to achieve. So contract has to be very, very clear, right? How they are going to be, how the software, if you are offshoring a software, how they are going to be designed, how they are going to be delivered, what plan of actions are there, who is going to monitor, what kind of control is there, all these. So essentially, if you think of, all these are management, and that's why we are studying all these aspects into management, because we are not going in too much into the technical aspects, right? Whatever we are talking about, whether it is IT service management or infrastructure management, right? If we want, we go into, and in some of our discussion, we'll go in depth into the model of CMMI, and we'll try and understand how does it manage, control, plan, coordinate these frameworks. They control, plan, and manage things. But here we try and associate and link every aspect of IT service delivery with management. How effectively we can do, how effectively we can manage. And when it comes to management, it is apart, what do we do in management? We plan, coordinate, control, monitor all these aspects. But here, these plannings and monitoring and control are actually accompanied with delivery and design, because it is embedded into this. Without having proper design and delivery, because it is related to software, so you need to design, you need to analyze the problem, you need to design it, you need to make sure that it is delivered on time with the expected level of quality, right? So these should be as per the contract, and the management aspect is embedded in it. Anything else?